You are listening to selfdiscoverymedia.com, where illumination and inspiration is but a click away. With so many genre topics for you on everything that you need to know in life. We celebrate and share the people who have taken the journey before you and who are now here to serve you with their wisdom and their knowledge. The next show coming up is... Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Welcome back to another edition for the love of music right here on selfdiscoverymedia.com. I'm your host, Sara Troy, and I have a very special guest for you here today, Darius Brubeck, and his beautiful jazz music. We're going to be playing some of his music intermittently through the show, and we're closing out with it. But it's that kind of music that just gets you quietly into the groove. You find your shoulders start moving, the hips start swaying, it relaxes you, it takes you into a different place. It's not this kind of get up and boogie type music. It's music that really kind of speaks to the heart and the soul, gets you into the groove of life, following that wave. And it really, really is very, very cool. Now, Darius comes to music very, very well from his dad, Dave Brubeck. Take Five, you might have heard of that before, one of my favorites. So he grew up in the musical world. And why did he choose the piano? Why jazz? What influence did his dad have? Where has he gone around the world? He's literally just come back from Russia, and he has a new album coming out live in Poland, and we're going to be talking all about that. Plus, his years in South Africa teaching and playing and influencing other musicians. So let's get right to it and introduce Darius. Hello, Darius. Welcome to the show.
Hello, Sara.
Wonderful to have you here. I've been listening to your music. We've been listening to your music in the car, and I have a little 86-year-old landlady, and as she's driving, she's bobbing her head to the music. I would call groovy music in the sense that it gets you into a groove. It gets you into a state of being. But let us wind back. Influence from your dad. You obviously grew up with music. And
Yes.
music was something right from the word go for you. And not everybody who grows up with this and with a famous dad goes on to becoming a musician themselves. When was it that you knew that music was so important in your life?
Those are kind of two different questions. Well, I sense the question within that is, when did I know I would be a professional musician? And I would say quite late in life, after I'd graduated from university. But as far as music being important in life, if you can think of it in those terms, it was just a natural part of life. It was very important in the sense that both my uncles were also musicians. My grandmother, my father's mother, was a classical pianist, and she visited often. My father's adult friends who came over to rehearse with him, obviously. So we, when I say we, I'm from a family of 6 kids. I'm the eldest. So we grew up thinking that music was so much a part of life that that's just what you did when you grew up. We didn't necessarily think of it occupationally.
Just so you slide into. Did you study music at university?
Yes and no. Again, the obvious thing would have been like to go to a conservatory and learn to be a great pianist. I didn't do that. I went to a liberal arts university called Wesleyan University, and I studied ethnomusicology. Now, this was back in the 60s when this was a very, very new thing. Now, it sounds sort of like a big mouthful, but if you break it down, ethnomusicology, it's a combination of musicology and anthropology. So it's observing music in society, music as a part of life in different cultures, how this manifests, how that sort of thing. So there was, a lot of history and a lot of that kind of thing, not a lot of practical work at that time.
Hmm. Well, when you think about it, actually, music has been the common language, hasn't it? It doesn't matter whether somebody could actually speak a language or not. Music was something that always brought people together and is a language in itself. And throughout history, music has been used in all religions. And a way of bringing people together, but also a statement in many ways, hasn't it? So, knowing the history of music, I think, gives us a better understanding on how to listen to it or to play it, whichever way one wants to go.
Well, and in my case, because I ended up being a player after all, um, it was really both things. And you're certainly right. Music is universal. There's no culture that doesn't have music, and also music communicates very well
Mm.
um, across cultures. We may not know. Having said that, one of the interesting things is, like, if you listen to Chinese opera or pygmy music, or something very exotic, very different from ours, we may not appreciate it in the same way as people who grew up in that culture. But the amazing thing is that we still process it as music.
Hmm. Hmm.
And without going too deep into science I don't understand, I've only read a couple of books about this, but from Oliver Sacks, for instance, who was a great neurosurgeon and researcher on brain, and also a very, very good classical pianist, really well qualified, did studies that prove that music is as inbuilt as part of our brain and as specific as language and other abilities that and music may even be older than language.
Hmm.
It's possible that that's the case,
Or
that it might.
was the language in a way. I mean, the drums, the beat, you know. There's also other studies now to show how music actually in therapy works so well, and that the reason why it helps people in depression a great deal, because it literally does raise your frequency. It
Yeah,
raises up your vibration. And so, you can find yourself in a mood or down, and you just don't even know why, or maybe you're angry, who knows what state of being you're in, and you put on that right piece of music and it just mellows you right out, or it just equilibriums you to such a state. So music is such a wonderful therapy, never mind communication and an uplifter, but just a fantastic therapy as well. And being able to dive into different types of music as well, not just getting stuck into one groove, right?
right. Yeah, yeah, certainly.
Glitches. Why the piano? I know the piano is very dear to you. You play it beautifully,
Well,
but
thank
why
you.
piano?
Well, I guess that's very simple. Is my father played piano, and I'm the eldest, and it's also the ideal instrument for composition. I do a lot of composing, and um, my earliest ambition as a musician, and this does go back to, it somewhat contradicts some of the things I said earlier, but I didn't see myself as a player, but I did see myself as potentially a composer. So, if you have two hands and a keyboard in front of you, it's a lot easier to work things out. Um, there are very skilled violinists or whatever who can perfectly well compose, but it's just a great tool to have. And you hear really the full range of the orchestra and then some.
Mm.
The whole gamut of the keyboard. So that's a good answer to why the piano, I think.
You've never been tempted to go into something else?
Um, no, I've been more than tempted. When I was a teenager, the way to be popular was to play guitar,
Of
so I
course,
did.
of course.
Uh, and before that, when I was just in elementary school, I took up trumpet because that was the way to be in a band. You you can't really be in a school band as a pianist. I mean, maybe nowadays you can, but there was a much narrower spectrum of music available in schools then. So, I really liked both of them, but I don't think there was ever any question that piano would always dominate. With the other instruments, let's put it this way, it would be like being right-handed all your life and just deciding that it would be fun to do some things as a lefty. You know, you're,
Yeah.
I had a limited ability, and it's helped my piano playing ultimately. You just get a different perspective by learning another instrument. But I don't even own a trumpet now.
You're right.
And I never play guitar. I own one, and I kind of like the sound of it, but that's about it.
Don't you think there's a connection between the instrument? I interviewed a wonderful gentleman, a saxophonist, who's been playing for over 30 years. I always say the saxophone is the saxophone because it's such a beautiful central instrument. And, I've heard it on your quartet as well. And that I think an instrument and the player become one, that is an extension of your intention. And that I think it's a marriage between you and the instrument.
Well, so it's instruments that you can own and carry around with you, like saxophones. That's the way it should be, and that's why. Well, you mentioned my quartet, Dave O'Higgins. He's a fantastic player, and he has invested a lot of time and money in collecting instruments. He knows, he can maybe tell you more than you really need to know about mouthpieces, reeds, saxophones, the whole thing. But yeah, it's very important to him. And while he would sound good playing any instrument, he's developed a relationship, as you say, with the tenor sax that he plays and the soprano that he plays, and it's very important to him that it is an extension of his personality. And Matt Ridley, the bassist, well, I'm talking about the group now, but
yeah, please do. Yes, let's introduce the group.
Yeah, so Matt's been through a few different basses since joining the group, but it's always interesting, to hear him, talk about it. And we're setting up on stage, and he'll say, well, this is more of an orchestral bass, or this is more of a jazz bass. The instrument he has now is a very fine Czech bass that but it is a process of, I guess, instrument discovery can also be a kind of self-discovery.
Yeah.
And Wesley, the drummer, has all drummers here. This is the album. You see, he's got a cymbal bag.
Right.
They always carry their own cymbals. It's usually too much of a schlep to bring a whole drum kit with you, but you can take along your cymbals and sticks, and maybe a snare, the smaller parts of a drum kit, some small percussion instruments. So so that's a whole thing, and there's a real art to having a consistent sound when you're a drummer, going from
one drum set to another.
One kit to another, and one kit to another, but he knows how to tune them, and he adds his own, his own smaller stuff, which tends to be, of course, the more high-pitched things. So those are the things you really hear quite distinctly in the whole musical texture.
I mean, it's the same with you, though. When you go with piano, you're not taking your piano, on the plane with you, so you go in and the piano is probably differently tuned the way you want it.
Well, it should be uniformly tuned, but every instrument, it's a physical thing. It's not a synthesizer. So everything affects it: temperature, humidity, how old it is, the last person who played it. It can
Yeah.
be perfectly in tune. It should be. Um, if you're giving a concert, and you can minimize the amount of uh, variation by saying, well, in my case, I always want a Steinway D if I can get one, but not everyone has one.
Hmm.
So um, you learn to
Adjust.
yeah, you adapt, and sometimes uh, other things other than the instrument, um, in the case of a pianist, become more the signature elements because, oh well, the sound on the CD is a different piano than because it was recorded in Dave O'Higgins' studio than the sound you would get if we recorded here, and that again will be different from the live sound you'll hear on the Live in Poland album. But I think you can still tell it's me. But
Right.
it's a different kind of relationship.
I think if you're a musician, you're going to understand there's different bases, like there are. I don't know, I'm not a musician, that each piano has its own quote signature. You would have to really be a fine-tuned musician to be able to pick that up, which, the general population is just really, it's about the music. And really, when you're thinking about the music, it's how does it make you feel? Because
Yeah,
it's all about feeling, isn't it? Music, you're expressing your feelings through the music, and you're inviting other people to feel something because of it.
yeah. You should try always as a performer to um, not only do a it's a kind of tricky thing, but I see the sort of territory you want to get in. There's uh, if you're if you're really if you're playing for a live audience, you're trying to unify that audience. You're trying to
Mhm.
uh, tune them to the same um,
Wavelength.
wavelength. Yeah, sometimes literally wavelength
Yes.
that you're on. So um, in some ways, it's like acting, and I don't mean
Mm.
acting as in pretending. I mean that um, if I'm playing a song like "Sea of Troubles" is one of the tunes we recorded recently, it's a real down song. And you might recognize the phrase from Hamlet's soliloquy, where he's, the to be or not to be
Hmm.
soliloquy. So he's thinking about, whether it's, really whether to live or not. Um,
Which is the state where humanity is feeling at the present moment. So very apropos.
okay, so in that tune, I really have to dump myself there.
Hmm. Hmm.
That's and the band goes there. But the whole point is that we don't stay there by
Right.
articulating this. Um, and it's also inherent in the composition. It is what makes it an effective composition. Is it comes from a very low place to something that's a little more open, a little less closed in, a little brighter. Um, it maintains a kind of sense of anxiety or even frustration, but then gradually some redeeming things come in, and music is is great. Our musical system is great with dealing, uh,
Hmm.
as an emotional language. You can really get all of those affects, and when you just talk about them, it sounds like you're
Moaning.
like you're. It sounds a little contradictory, or sounds,
Mm.
like maybe you're trying to do a soundtrack, but it's not that. It's more direct. If you're talking about something, that's one thing. If you're feeling it and expressing it, it does take it to a different level. And so whether you're talking about something really gorgeous and huge and long lasting, like Mahler Symphony or something on a much more modest scale, like my Sea of Troubles, you're you're going on a journey, and it's important to understand that the musicians aren't just doing it as a demonstration. They're we're not pretending that
Right.
this is happening. We're
You're in
we're
it.
there. We're
Yeah.
living. That's what you learn to do after you, of course, have mastered the technical side that
Right.
enables you to do that in the first place.
Well, that's what we're always looking for, isn't it? When you watch any competition, they say, yes, that was technically perfect, but where's the feeling? Where's the connection? And we're always looking for that connection. And, having a song that represents the times that are in trouble. And, I've just done a couple of shows this week on social depression, and how it's quite rampant around the world right now. And we need to recognize that with people. It's not about, oh, let's just be positive and let's cheer you up. It's connecting with them where they are and helping them go through the process to lift themselves out of it and be able to see life in a different way. A lot of the time people think that it's the words in the music that do that. And yes, many times the song and the words really connect. For me, it's always the music. The music is what's going to take me on the journey. The music is what's going to ignite a feeling within me and kind of translate something, whether it's going to uplift or have me be aware. But I'm always about the music. The words are great, but I don't always remember them. But the music I will. Because the
Mm,
music, I think, is something that really, it bypasses the programming in the head. And I think it goes straight to the heart and the soul of us. And it speaks to how we feel inside out that very, very often we simply don't have words for.
yeah, right. Or if we had words for everything, we might not have music, and
Right.
vice versa. They're different. These are different faculties.
Mhm.
They work they work well together, but they are independent.
Yes.
And I mean
Yes.
that as to refer to what we were talking about earlier, that's a neurological fact,
Mhm.
but it just shows the great diversity of ways we have of apprehending and influencing the world, how the world comes to us, how we
Mhm.
put ourselves into the world. And when you talk about um, well, again, I'll refer to another composition which you have, Earthrise. When
Yes.
you talk about lifting out of
Mhm.
a kind of down state, I think nothing nothing does that better than getting a sense of perspective, a sense of scale, a sense of where you are um, relative to history, the cosmos, etc.
Mhm.
And not to belittle oneself, but
Right.
just that um, we get amazingly concerned about things that maybe don't have to upset us so much or may not last very long,
Mhm.
uh, that sort of thing. And I wrote a piece called Earthrise after seeing, this is quite old now, but there was a photograph that was taken by NASA, the National Space and Aeronautics Administration, of planet Earth rising up over the horizon of the moon. And you can clearly see the perspective is from the moon, and you can see Earth looking the way it does if you have a world globe in your library or something. You
Mhm.
can see kind of the shape of North and South America in the distance. And um, in concerts, I sometimes talk about having this perspective, and it's a many layered thing. I mean, there's obviously there's a great concern about climate change and about and the latest slogan is "There's no planet B."
Right.
Certainly,
Exactly. Yeah.
certainly worth bearing in mind. So it has that layer, which is a layer of concern, but also I think if you see the whole world, you don't see any of the boundaries that are
Right.
drawn on maps, and you begin to grasp a wholeness that makes uh, disputes over nationality, migration, religious and ethnic and racial prejudice and so on, just seem irrelevant. You don't even have to talk about what's wrong with it. Of course, all those things have bad social effects. That's down here on the planet,
Right.
and we have to do what we can. But also, zoom out and you see, this is just little stuff. And when you see it that way, you need to see it both ways.
Yeah.
You have to
The
use
double
both
perspective.
both parts of your brain, your imagination. But but the last thing it is depressing. Um,
Hmm.
you're going to um, seeing things from a distance doesn't mean being alienated. It just means getting a sense of scale.
Perspective. Yeah.
And
Yes.
scales are time scales and space, E minor scales on a
I mean,
this is getting
was it a picture like that brought the music to you? Where do you get your inspiration from? Is it from seeing that and getting that perspective that really was so small, and these boundaries don't mean anything when you look at it from above? Is that how the music then starts playing in your head? From those type of things.
no, not exactly. I mean, it would be lovely if that were the case. Uh, I, you know, I, a lot of what I do, and I think a lot of what any musician does in terms of composing, is derived from knowledge of music generally. It's derived from other music that you've heard or musical devices that you think are effective, and probably a desire to
Yes.
to use certain things at a certain time. But that's saying no more than to say that writers are people who have read widely and have big vocabularies,
Hmm.
and are going to put things together. So something like that picture is a motive, a
Hmm.
motivation, and almost a trigger for something. Okay, I want to. This song has. Okay, for example, I think this is easy enough to understand if you hear the song. It has uh, long note values, which gives you a connotation of space. It has a repeated underlying rhythm, which is an odd time rhythm, which is, I hope a nice groove, as you say, but it's not like sort of a loud backbeat,
Hmm.
uh, dancing up and down kind of thing. It's
Right.
more of a linear flowing kind of thing. The chords last a long time, but there's a lot of action within that, because there's a lot of rotation in the universe, a lot of things
Yes.
flying around.
Yes. Yes.
So, all of that is there. But I think, you know, trying to get sort of a sense of distance and scale and, even a bit of numerology, and that, there's, the number seven, it's, in a 7 meter, but the overall structure is 12, uh, 12 bars, like the blues, but it doesn't use blues chords. So, I wouldn't want to, on the one hand, pretend that it's a bigger thing than it really is, but I am also trying to reveal in a way that there's the special things about the musical language that do make
Hmm.
it unique. It depends on being knowledgeable about these effects, but
Yes.
still something has to make you want to do it and give you an intention and the ability to carry through on it.
The igniter, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Where's that inspiration coming from? And, let's talk about the Spanish piece as well,
yeah,
because we have the three pieces here on the blog that people can listen to. So tell us how that came about. And, this is different.
yeah.
But what was that ignition there?
Okay, that's music that's derived from music. I've I said I went through a guitar period as a teenager. I listened to a lot of flamenco, um, which is just marvelous improvised music, um, Spanish guitar and voice, and it's very improvised, but it's a completely different system than jazz. I also love the great album Sketches of Spain, which was a collaboration of Miles Davis and the great composer arranger Gil Evans. So, obviously I really liked that. I've always liked Chick Corea, who, I wrote in the Spanish mode, I think, before he wrote My Spanish Heart, but Chick Corea always used what he had kind of inherited, through his lineage. So there were all those things, and I just thought, okay, I can work with this. So this is music that comes from music. It doesn't come from from something external to music. But then on the other hand, what draws me to flamenco is how expressive it is,
Yes.
how it is a different musical system. So then the challenge becomes working with elements that I think people who have heard Spanish music will recognize. They'll say, "Oh, I can remember the bullfight poster I had in college when I hear this," or maybe they've been to Spain, or maybe it reminds them of music they've heard. So there's a lot of that in music that refers to, in literature, you would call it intertextual,
Mm-hmm.
and we don't have exactly that kind of specific vocabulary in music, but it's music that has to do with music, and it's kind of saying, great, this is an influence, I've taken it
Yes.
on board, I understand how to use it now, I love it in the original, I'm not improving it
Mm-hmm.
in any sense. That is not the intent.
Just reinterpreting.
Yeah, and it gives me another palette,
Yeah.
another range of expression that I wouldn't have if I didn't go into the Spanish mode. So there it is.
Yeah. Well, it's a lot like an artist, may use watercolors and decide to go into oil paints, right?
Yeah,
You're going to take what you know and kind of your basic signature, but you're going to explore this avenue and see
yeah,
where it takes you. So the thing is with music, you might be using the same instrument all over and over again, but of course the magnitude of all of those keys going together in different formations and the sounds that come out, and as you said, the pause and the gaps or the acceleration, it is quite wondrous, really, is how that
mhm.
one instrument can produce so much.
Yeah. Oh, and speaking of one instrument, one of the features in the Spanish mode is Matt Ridley does a really really good bass solo. Now, um, the connection is really it's a string instrument. We don't have a guitar in the band, but there are ways where
Mm-hmm.
even though it's a quartet and it's a very standard lineup, saxophone, bass, drums, piano, that's almost automatic. You almost don't have to say it if you say you have a jazz quartet, although it could be other things,
Mm-hmm.
obviously. But that's the expectation. But still, within that, you can orchestrate it. You can
Yeah.
spotlight different instruments for different, not only for different tunes, but really, I would say, for different kinds of music. So in the Spanish mode, we all play on it. We all play the same amount of time on it, but somehow the thing that gives it a particular focus is the bass solo.
Yeah. Again, there is something about bass, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
you always feel like it's really grounding you. You know, it's really it just kind of it's a deep, beautiful thing that kind of really connects you, and it kind of very much like a heartbeat, which I know the drums are as well, but I think the bass definitely is.
Hmm.
Now, in 1976, you met my cousin, Catherine, who
Yeah,
then became your wife,
that's
and
right. That's
and
why we're
you,
talking here
yeah, exactly,
today
exactly.
across the continents. Yeah.
And you then moved to South Africa, to Durban, and your life and around music changed quite considerably then. Let's look at that journey. I mean, you know, from the States, you're now in England. Of course, you really do get around. But, you know,
Yeah.
Durban, I lived in Cape Town and Johannesburg, and Durban is a totally different type of city, very, very hot.
Yeah.
But how did you find, you know, people accepting your music there? You know, because I think the time period that you were there, everybody was going into kind of the groovy bands, the Doors, the this, the that, etc. Did that influence your music at that time?
No, but you've got the period slightly wrong. I did meet Catherine in 1976, but it was 1983 when we moved to Durban.
Right.
And the reason we moved to Durban was I had a unique opportunity to like really, um, it's very complicated to explain how this came about. Maybe we won't explain it. Just say what happened was I had the opportunity to start a jazz studies program at a university. And ironically, in the whole of Africa, there hadn't been a university level um, jazz studies program. The university music departments were pretty much colonial institutions who felt their job was to um, maintain, a kind of beachhead for European culture in Africa. Um, you would recognize this from your experience in Cape Town. I mean, what Cape Town is a very cultural place, but what did they have in Cape Town? They had a symphony orchestra, wonderful conservatory, really world-class South African College of Music, but they didn't have jazz. Um, so Kathy and I went on the understanding that I would be doing this. I would be setting up a jazz course at what was then the University of Natal. It's now called the University of KwaZulu-Natal, post 1994. 94 being the significant date that it is because that was the first democratic election in South Africa. The the only way to do this was to really change admission policies. And again, I know this is going to be edited to some extent. I'll try to make it simple. But what it meant was to have a jazz course, we needed to bring in African students who would not have been qualified for university on any other grounds, except that they could play their instruments really well. And so this was like really challenging the whole system. Between 83, well, the first 83, yeah, the first 10 years were the hardest. It took really a lot of persistence to make this work.
So that's when apartheid, you know, was
Yeah,
happening. And so, you know, all of a sudden, you know, but there is that transition going on. So although now, you know, Africans and white people were meant to be equal, there was still the transition of everything going on. So you were right there during that crutch there, trying to make a
yeah,
program happen.
right. And so we had to be very and I say we because I can't. Um, it'd be impossible to overstate how much Kathy contributed to this, your cousin, because I was first and foremost a musician, a player, someone who had been out, playing gigs, learning as fast as I could to also be an academic, and that means not only building up a knowledge base, it means really learning how to teach and communicate, and learning how to work the system, learning how university administration works, and all of that was like very new to me. Maybe that was a good thing because I wasn't afraid to experiment and take chances that someone else might have known better,
Right, yes.
might have realized how impossible it might have been.
Right.
Meanwhile, Kathy was working behind the scenes, constantly trying to find ways to fundraise for students so that we could actively recruit students. We can actually bring them into the program with funding so that they could live and study. And that usually at first meant living with us, literally in our house for some period of time. And then, other arrangements could be brought into place. The apartheid system was never as absolute as some people may think it was. But you had to work around it. There were always ways you could, but never easy ways.
Yeah.
You could do it if it was important to you. You could, and there was certainly no excuse to not do anything. But you had to find ways of getting housing and money and overcoming a very inadequate secondary education system, that is, high schooling and so forth. And we managed to do this, but one of the things that made it work so well was that because we were the first and only, we were the best and the worst. We were
the be-all.
Yeah. So that meant that instead of just drawing on people locally, we were, we were getting students from all over the country. And the reason they were coming was for the jazz course. They weren't students who were already there and thinking, oh, it might be nice to play in the jazz band too. They were coming specifically for that. So they were very dedicated. A lot of them had significant professional experience and had never heard of there being formal jazz education and never thought that a university would offer it. But when we got the word out, and we did everything possible to do that. I was a radio DJ for a while, believe it or not.
Mm-hmm.
While teaching during the day, I was broadcasting at night. I was playing gigs when I wasn't on the air. I was writing columns in the newspapers. Looking back on it, I find it hard to believe we had that much energy. But,
Yes.
we did.
Yes.
We did
Especially when
all
you're
of
passionate enough about something, right?
Yeah.
You're going to find that energy. Yeah.
Now, the obvious question, which nobody's asked, but once the program goes out, people will say, yeah, but what were you doing in South Africa during the cultural boycott? Why did you go there in the first place? And the answer to that really is that we didn't go there blindly. It wasn't, I knew it wasn't like, okay, you can start a jazz course in Peru, or it was a specific situation, and the racial dynamics were very important. One had to be sensitive to all of that. But Kathy was very well connected in the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa and externally, and we did consult with the ANC mission that had observer status at the UN. we consulted with members of the PAC in London and New York. As a musician, I was living this kind of cosmopolitan life anyway, so, you know, had access to these kind of people through Kathy, who was a big activist, you know, very trusted. She was the national secretary of the Liberal Party under Alan Paton until it was disbanded. And the feedback we got, and this really sustained us, you know, on the one hand, we had to fight the system, which sometimes meant not fighting. Sometimes it meant diplomacy. Sometimes it meant, you know, softly, but just do what you have to do. On the one hand, we had that, but on the other hand, we had to make sure that we had the support of the Black community, because otherwise it would just be almost normalizing apartheid.
You're right.
You know, that was the risk.
Yeah. Yeah.
But we came, you know, we managed to navigate through all of that by having very, very good students, very good musicians, forming groups, helping the cause by really making ourselves very, very popular by by having some good bands. I mean, and eventually founding the Center for Jazz and Popular Music, which was a jazz club on campus with a bar and a bandstand and you know, regular entertainment. So that was from '83 to 2005. That was like the center of my career, you might say.
Yeah. And how much influence, you know, the African beat did that have to your music?
Well, I wouldn't reduce it to beat, but certainly African attitude, a tremendous amount of influence. I mean, first of all, it was an honor as well as being a lot of fun to play with the musicians who were there. And a while ago, I talked about, well, you know, Spanish music. That's another thing. Now, I didn't go as deeply by a long shot into Spanish music as I did into African music, but it was easy. It was approachable because South Africans had built up their own form of jazz, and so they were like more than. I wasn't meeting them halfway. They were 3/4 of the way to where I was coming from anyway. I had to simply learn how to appreciate a certain attitude toward music, you know, being open to different things. I really learned the power of simplicity and how to get the most out of a simple idea. And an effective simile I once used in a lecture on South African music seemed to work. I say it's effective because other people who've kind of looked at this area felt it expressed something. It's kind of like working in primary colors. You know, you're really upfront with the emotional content. Your shapes are going to be like really sharply defined and contrasting. It's a very direct sound world, and there isn't a lot of formalism involved.
Right.
More like you try to get to the music has a lot of repetition in it,
Right.
uh, but that doesn't make it boring. It's more like you get to a point where it won't get any better
Yeah.
and stop, you know.
Yes.
You sort of, you know, once you reach a plateau where you feel like you've connected all of the
Dots together.
yeah, and
I mean, the rhythm of the African music is just really wonderful, isn't it? It has such a beautiful flow to it, especially when you hear them sing,
yeah,
coming together. It is just, is quite, intoxicating in many ways, because of that rhythm. And it's like building a crescendo, isn't it? But as you said, repetitive type rhythm, just gathering and gathering and gathering. Was that the same, the way they brought, to the jazz? Kind of that building up?
yeah. And No Mali, which is the track that I sent you from
Which we're going
my.
to close out the show with, for sure.
Okay, that was composed by Hugh Masekela, and it may have even, if I'm right about this, it doesn't make a lot of difference, but I think he wasn't actually in South Africa at the time. I think he was in the U.S. And a lot of the exile um, black musicians and their audience had a lot of nostalgia for Africa and kind of the feeling of being there, the kind the closeness that just doesn't exist if you're in Los Angeles
Yeah,
or some place like that, where
yeah.
you have
A
a
flavor
village,
of home. Mm.
yeah, flavor of home, a village, a church, or a
Yeah.
township, where everyone knows everybody. So there's a lot of nostalgia for that in this music, and I think that's apparent in his composition and in our interpretation of it. I hope so. Um, it has a very positive energy. It's not just sad, but it's a music of memory. It's a little bit about what's missing.
Nostalgia. Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
and some flourishes of humor, of
Hmm.
course, because that was always there with Hugh and with Abdullah and with all the guys who came over to the States or stayed in England and France. A lot of South African musicians left the country in the 60s and early 70s. Most of them went back because that's home.
Yes, exactly. A new home where they can now go and influence a new generation. You're writing a book on Africa, are you not?
Kathy and I are writing a book together, and if our marriage survives that, uh,
It can survive anything. Look what you guys have
yeah,
accomplished together.
yeah. So yes, it's a memoir of our time in South Africa, and it's a long period. There were a lot of changes. By the time we got to the end of our time there, all the things that were problematic, that were, sometimes not to make it too dramatic, but sometimes even illegal, certainly frowned on, certainly difficult, have now become quite normalized uh,
Yeah.
in
Yes.
university and society. Jazz education is in every university that has a music department in South Africa. It's really grown that much. Most of those departments have either um, people who I taught or even people who I taught.
Right. Yeah. So,
Uh,
the wonderful ripple effect, right? Being that pioneer and then seeing how it ripples out and becomes
yeah,
something that's more of a norm.
yeah. So it's been normalized, it's been accepted, and that's actually the legacy. It's not specifically anymore the music that I played, or even the um, specific program at University of KwaZulu-Natal in Durban, it's the fact that now this is reality. It's there. It's what people expect the university to have, like an English department. You
Right.
know, it's just
Mm-hmm. The
it's
opportunity
hard.
there is there now. Yeah, and it wouldn't have been had you and Kathy not, been willing to go down the rocky road
Yeah,
to normalize it, and through the tumultuous times. So for sure. Now you have just come back from Russia.
that's right.
Please,
Yeah.
please tell us, what was that like over in Russia?
Uh, well, it wasn't an extended tour. This was more like putting a toe in the water. Um, I think and anyone who goes to Russia would confirm this. The first impression is you really feel the largeness of it, the power, the effect of, it's just huge. Moscow has 8-lane highways going through the middle of it. Like not just around the periphery. That's so.
With all these historic buildings as well, right?
Yeah,
Slap.
but
Yeah,
modern, because England's and we all we have reason to love all of the places that we've lived and visited. England specializes on and quaint and cozy, like the place we had dinner together.
yes,
And,
wonderful little restaurant in Rye. That was beautiful. Thank you.
right, medieval,
Yes.
low
Mhm.
ceilings. Shakespeare put on a show there. Russia, um, you get this huge monumental architecture. It's not very Moscow anyway. I shouldn't say
Mhm.
Russia. It's not very pedestrian friendly, uh, but but you have just marvelous architecture. Uh, these huge Stalinist buildings, and then more traditional Orthodox churches, that kind of thing. Apparently, very wealthy country. And when I did a concert, the Darius Brubeck Quartet, we did a concert there. Now in England, we play some pretty large venues, but it's jazz and it's mostly acoustic, so it's not like we're playing Wembley Stadium or something.
Right,
We're not.
right. It is more of an intimate thing, jazz,
Yeah.
anyway, isn't it?
But their intimate thing, we had 1,000 people. You know, so I mean, it felt fine. It's just, but you have to you. In fact, I loved it, but you have to adjust your scale accordingly. Everything
Right.
is going to be, a bit,
Magnified.
yeah, magnified, amplified. And you could see why, this will seem kind of an odd thing to say. I'm not saying it from the point of view of accepting um, Russia's influence on American elections and things like that. I wish that weren't the case. But I do understand, having been there, why they feel they have as much right to run the world as we do.
Right.
Um, why not? They're big, they're powerful, they're technologically advanced, everything works. And that reflects back.
Mm-hmm.
So why, I think since the Cold War ended, it's become, a bit questionable why America has an automatically higher moral position in the hierarchy of things.
Which is all questionable at the present moment. And there's a huge shift going on, isn't there? Like, the pack has been reshuffled. And it's going to be very, very interesting how the cards are played out, because we're definitely seeing a transition around the world right now. And I think, in looking at what power is subject to, to to conversation and perspective of how are you empowering your people? Because if your people are empowered and they have the opportunity of enrichment, then I think you really have a very powerful country. If going the other way, which seems to be that China might be, when building up of the army and everything else, going back to kind of an old paradigm of dictatorship. So it's a very interesting time. And I think this is where music really is something that really does need to unite us, most certainly needs to become a statement for us at this particular time, because I think music at the present moment is the only harmony that we actually have in this transition that's going on.
Yeah, and it's interesting to recall, if you're, you know, at one time, Russia was so anti-jazz that it was literally illegal to listen to Voice of America on the radio.
Wow.
Now it's, you know, I noticed, again, this was, you know, just only playing in Moscow. We played the large auditorium, 1,000 people, and then we also played a jazz club. Now it's really quite fashionable amongst young professionals that's kind of, you know, I don't want to be cynical about their liking music that I like, but I think it's also, you know, a bit of a status symbol, you know, that,
Yeah.
that we're this Western, we're this sophisticated, you know, we're not,
Right.
you know, we're not outsiders anymore. We're
Right.
insiders. We're, you know, we're with it. And
Yeah,
so,
the advancement is in culture as well
yeah,
as, yeah.
no.
Yeah.
So, so
So it really surprised you, the reception that you had there.
yeah. So music really is a bridge.
Yeah.
And it always was. There's an interesting backstory to our trip to Poland last year, 2018. We went there. It was the 60th anniversary of my father's 1958 tour, which was during the height of the Cold War. It was 2 years after the 1956 Hungarian Revolution, you know, which really had a huge impact beyond just Hungary. So there, you know, there was a lot of hostility and mistrust between the U.S. and not only the Soviet Union, but the satellite countries behind the Iron Curtain. Now, I was on that trip. I was 10 years old, and it was my first appearance on stage was, you know, as a little kid, literally being pushed out there by, by the people who were handling the tour, because they were so impressed that this American star, Dave Brubeck, trusted them enough to bring two of his children and his wife. So that was an amazing PR moment, which was not planned. You know, we did not know that this would happen, and it just, but it just totally changed the vibe. You know, it, and the Polish people. Again, talking about music as a bridge, one of the most moving things about that trip didn't happen on stage at all. I went to the Solidarity Museum in Szczecin. Solidarity was the movement that led to Polish independence, but it had a long history, and they have a museum on the site where Polish demonstrators were shot down by Soviet and Polish police in 1970. Well, now that area has become a park. There's a monument there, and there's also a museum that is what we call a narrative museum. So as you enter it, okay, you know the ending, because the museum is there. You know, it has a happy ending. There's Poland. It's a country that, you know, whatever its politics are, which are not the best at the moment, but it is a free country. The Polish people are electing governments, and they're not just puppets of the Soviet Union. And that's a desirable outcome. The first thing you see, though, when you go into it, which is kind of going into a tunnel, it's literally underground. They're reminding you that freedom started underground.
Yes, it starts at the roots of
Yeah,
everything, right?
right. But also underground in the sense that you don't have people like you on the air talking
Right.
about freedom. You know,
Yes.
they're talking about tractors or, you know, whatever Soviets would allow them to talk about. You go underground. The very first exhibit, the very first vitrine, is an old-fashioned shortwave radio, which was what we had before there was the internet, as a way of contacting the outside world. And above that is the cover of a program with a cartoon of my father, Dave Brubeck, and the information about the concert in Polish.
Wow. Wow.
So yeah, wow. So, you know, I mean, that really hit us. What they're
Yes.
saying is the beginning of the freedom movement was when people started tuning into jazz.
Wow. Talk about influence. Wow.
Now that doesn't mean that there wasn't a freedom movement anyway, but it was
Right.
a way of situating it culturally. It was turning west rather than east. It was wanting something that was forbidden,
Yeah.
but getting it anyway. You know, they're all those levels of it, and there it was, like so graphically up front. Um, so
So
you
if you
know,
think about it, the Brubeck family has had quite an enormous amount of influence on changes of
yeah.
freedom.
Well, that's what our book is called. It's called Playing the Changes,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and there's a film that's being made about us too, a documentary film. Not so don't ask, well, who's playing?
Nobody can play you, Darius. You have to play yourself.
Well, I don't know, Jeff Goldblum maybe, but it's it's a documentary that started in Poland in November of last year. They shadowed us on our whole tour. And that was meant to be just a documentary about the Poland thing, but the producer and director asked us, well, you know, what's our next big trip? And that was to South Africa this year in 2019. And then, of course, the conversation, well, why were we going to South Africa? And, you know, and we explained that and said, oh, well, this is great. And they followed us to Johannesburg, Durban, Cape Town, Stellenbosch, and interviewed a lot of musicians and academics, former students, journalists. So it's all putting together, you know, what you
Nice.
said, this, you know, we just happen to pop up at moments in history that, you know, so we can't claim to have caused the changes, but we are certainly
Shifted them.
there. We were
Yeah.
there, and
Mm-hmm.
we were playing the changes.
Well, people don't realize that change doesn't have to be this big crescendo. It's a nudge sometimes, or a different perspective, showing a different direction for people to go in, and then they gather their own momentum after that. But, you know, change is a thought, a pause, a comma, an insight, and, you know, that's what builds up to the bigger changes. So for music to be that influence, which we went, you know, right back to the beginning, how music is our language, is our
Yeah.
communication. The thing is, the mind gets in the way with old programming chatter, you know, of expectation, of dictation, of what things should be. But when music speaks to the heart and the soul and the spirit of you, it's speaking the truth, and it's igniting that truth within you. Therefore, it changes the mind. And
It
that's
does.
the beauty and the power of music.
Right.
So we've got to keep playing. Now, you showed your new CD cover there, and that is of the trip of Poland, or the music from there?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, here it is again. We, it's funny though. It's like seeing it in a mirror, isn't it?
Yeah.
Are you reading it the
Yes,
right?
yes, yes, yes,
It's
and
funny
it will
because
also be up there on the YouTube anyway. And for other people, please come back to the blog. You're going to see everything there, right?
okay. So anyway, yeah, we played 6 concerts. They were all complete sellouts. The reception was marvelous. Uh, what was especially moving for me were, of course, there were some very old people from 1958.
No, yeah.
You know, there were a few who made it, back. And I think it was kind of being present at those concerts. It was kind of like a victory lap for them. They were kind of,
Hmm.
I hope anyway,
I was
showing,
there at the beginning,
yeah,
and
and
I'm now here again. Yeah,
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 yeah, and bringing their children and grandchildren,
yes, yes,
and um, maybe reminding people that they've been on a hell of a journey from 1958 through 89 to where we are now.
yeah, yeah, yes. And I
And
think this is
no,
I think this is something that we miss here in North America. I'm from the UK. I've lived in South Africa. I've traveled quite extensively. Europe has this history that you can see, you can touch, and it's the memory of what was to what is now is very clear. In North America, everything is so renewed so fast that we don't actually hold on to that history and understand the historical changes and the effects that they are having on our today. But as you said, going in underground there and then seeing the impact that that concert had, on it being a shift, being, igniting something in people, that it meant so much that they put it up there. And I think this is respect for a start.
yeah,
What wonderful respect. But it also just shows us that we go through life hoping that we're doing something that has a positive impact on
yeah,
somebody, that it helps someone else. To go back to something like that and see it and go, wow,
yeah,
that one concert, how it changed, to go back to South Africa and be interviewing and playing with your old students,
yeah,
and all of that just kind of shows a life well chosen, and you had a positive impact. And isn't that what we all want to look for in life? That we count, we've contributed, and that we made a difference.
yes. Right. Well, thank you for that.
We don't set out to do it, but because you've followed your passion. You've been true to who you are, your music,
Mm,
and the importance of it, what it meant to you, and you've passed that on. It's not that you just played technically and it was all very good. You always put your heart and soul into it. And so when it's heard, it ignites the heart and soul in other people. And so the message is received, whether it's the same dialogue or not, that doesn't matter.
right.
Message is received. And so
Yeah,
because you've been true to you, and yes, Catherine is a wonderful advocate. She is your cheerleader, your rock, your right hand woman. And you've picked a wonderful partner there to go through life with this, because she's just as passionate about your music and your journey, as you are. And so it's wonderful to have somebody by your side like that. But if you weren't committed to it, and this is why I love interviewing musicians, your commitment to your music is your commitment to your soul. It's
yeah, yeah,
right. It's your heart language, and this is why musicians, why it's so important for us to listen to the music and to know the musician's story, because it helps us look something inside ourselves and find something within ourselves, and listen to the music in a way where we really truly feel the message. And then once we feel it, we hear it, and it ignites something within us and puts us on a different path. So thank you for honoring your path and not deviating from it, but expanding on it and leaving such a wonderful legacy around the world.
well, thank you. Thanks for saying all that.
Most welcome. And the music, as I said, it's so easy to listen to. it's so relaxing, but at the same time, as you said, you find your shoulders grooving, and it just lightens you up, or it makes you have a perspective. But it's kind of that music that, if you get what I mean here, you don't have to listen to hear. You hear it, you know, it can even be in the background while you're working, and while you're working, it's just stimulating you, and just playing, you know, just keeping you on track, or lifting you up, or taking you down that one particular road. So you know, I invite everyone to listen to the music. We've got 3 songs here right now which they can, but when is the new CD coming out, and how can people get hold of it? Also, how can they download all of your other songs? So can you give us that information, please?
The official launch date is going to be December 14th. The group is playing at the Jazz Cafe in Camden Town in London, which is a very big venue. And I don't, when is this going out?
This goes out this week, next week, so November 12th.
Yeah, okay. So you can't get it.
Yet, but how do people
Yeah,
look out for it? Is it, do
okay.
they get it through your site?
No, not directly. I might get around to putting up a link. It's on Ubuntu, Ubuntu Records, which is a UK label. It's a South African word, by the way.
Right on Bantu, yes.
Yeah, Ubuntu. Uh, that's yeah, that's how you'll be able to get it. And certainly, when it is officially released, there'll be information at dariusbrubeck.com. There's also that's my personal website. There's the Darius Brubeck Quartet. It has a Facebook band page. And don't worry, we'll be doing our best to make sure people know.
Right.
Get it.
But it's not just that music, which has those 3 songs on it, but it also is all of your other music. People can download it and get it from iTunes and everything else. So there's plenty up there on all of your other music, and your trips and your concerts and everything else as well.
In the Spanish Mode is from an album called Years Ago, which is by the same group. And before that, there was a CD called Kathy's Summer, which,
which is the one I have, yes.
Yeah, one you have. So yeah, it's all going to be out there online, and depending on where you are, there'll be different ways of getting it. But I think if you remember, just remember my name and Ubuntu Records if you want a physical CD. And the downloading thing is sort of taken over that.
Yeah.
So I think that's what makes it easy for everybody.
Right.
But,
yes.
But
Yeah.
I always want to make a real CD. To me, it's
the tangible thing. Yes.
actual.
Yeah.
At the very least, we can take them to gigs, and then
Yeah.
when people buy them,
You can sign them.
we
Things like that.
we
Yeah.
sign them, and that's a good way to meet people, and they give us feedback on what they liked, and that's nice. But I suppose that won't last forever. Pretty soon it'll just all be download.
Yes, unfortunately, we are going to that digital world where
Yeah.
everything is, but it also makes it accessible for people. That means it's on their phone as they're driving or as they're walking. They can just play a song, and play a piece that they've got no excuse. So I am nowhere near a CD player. It's on your phone. Just click play. All right.
Yeah.
And that's the beauty of it. And of course, people can find you here at selfdiscoverymedia.com. Just put in your name, Darius Brubeck, and you will find his posting here. Please come and have a look at it, because not only does it tell you more about him and his history, etc., but it has all the links on there, plus those 3 songs for you to listen to, and get more of the feeling. And don't forget to share it. Music is really, really, really important. And I think at this particular time in life, it's very interesting. Your music has had such an impact in times of conflict and trouble and change in South Africa, in Poland, and who knows where else. And that just shows how impactful music really is in changing one's psyche and changing one's perspective, of giving people the courage to know that things can change. So obviously your music is a life changer. So if it can do it for Africa and it can do it for Poland, it can do it for us.
Okay, good.
Thanks so much for sharing with me here today, Darius. It's been a delight, and it was wonderful to actually meet you. It was
Mm.
quite funny because I had not seen Catherine in 44 years,
Yeah.
which I never realized it was that long. But I, of course, have been living in Canada for the last 39 years. So,
Yeah.
you know, we're all around the world. We really are. But I look forward to seeing you all again when I come back next year. And keep on playing, please. The music is really wonderful. And clearly, you're a person who is a game changer out there. So just keep influencing and keep inviting, because we need to hear that music.
Thank you very much, Sarah.
Okay. And love to Kathy. Okay.
Okay.
All right, folks, until next time, please listen to this music as we close out normally. Get into the groove and the beat. Come back to the posting and listen to the other songs. Don't forget to go to his site, dariusbrubeck.com, and download some of the other music. I promise you it will have a wonderful effect on how you feel. Don't forget to share it, because you must always share the goodwill. Until next time, folks, bye for now. We hope that you enjoyed the show and were inspired. Come and visit us at selfdiscoverymedia.com and see what other shows we have for you. And please do visit our selfdiscoverycommunity.org and see how you can be a part of giving back. Thank you very much.